In this video we're going to look at two Python standard library modules for working with paths and file system operations. Notably, we're going to look at the OS module, and we're also going to look at the newer pathlib module as well. So let's start by looking at the OS module, and what we're going to do is import that from the standard library. So import OS, and let me talk you through this setup here. I've opened a directory in VS Code that contains our files.py file. That's where we're writing the code at the moment. And we also have a couple of other things. We have a contract.docx. This is a Microsoft Word file, and you can imagine that that's some contract that we want to check and make sure it's on the server. And in addition to that, we have an images directory. It's empty, but we're going to use that directory to show a few different things throughout this tutorial. So let's start by setting up a variable that points to our file here, the contract, and it's going to be called file name. And what we're going to do first of all is we're going to check whether or not this file exists on the file system using the OS module. So what we can do here is we can use this function from the os.path module. It's os.path.exists, and we pass the file name to that. And if we print the output of that, it should evaluate to true. So we should see on our terminal when we run python files.py that this comes out as true, and that's what it is here. So if we change the name of the file name to contracts, we will now rerun this and it evaluates to false because there's no file with that name within our current directory. And if you watched previous Python primer videos, you might have seen that the isFile function as well. Let me spell that correctly. So os.path.isFile, that's going to check whether the object that you pass into that function is a file or not. So it could be a file, but it also could be a directory, it could be a symbolic link, or it could not exist, in which case it would evaluate to false. So if we run this, this will return false because we have the wrong file name here. If we save it with the correct file name, we now see that that is true. Whereas if we evaluate this function here and check is it a directory with the isdir function, that's going to evaluate to false in this case. So in addition to checking if something exists, we can check whether or not it's a file or a directory using these functions in the os.path module. So let's now see how to build a path to our images directory. So I'm going to delete this code here, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab the current working directory, and I'll save that in a variable called current_dir, and that's going to be equal to the os.getcwd function. So if we print that out here, that is going to evaluate to the current working directory, which is this particular directory on my Windows computer. So now we want to join that directory with the images directory. So we want to get a pointer to the images directory. So I'm going to set up another variable here called images directory, and this is going to be equal to os.path.join. And we're going to join the current directory with the images directory. So using os.path.join, this is a best practice when you want to join multiple paths together in Python. So we use that function and we pass to it the current directory, which is set here on line 5, and we also pass the images directory, so that will join up that images directory with the current directory. So now we can check using the isdir function, does the images directory exist? So os.path.isdir, and we'll pass the images directory to that function. This should print out true because of course that is a directory on our file system. So we've seen here how to do a few operations using the OS module. We've seen how to get the current working directory. We've seen how to check whether or not something is a directory or is a file with the isFile function. We've seen how to use the exists function to check whether or not something exists on the file system at the location you provide. And we've also seen the os.path.join function, and this is used to build paths in a platform independent manner using the OS module. Let's now check out the pathlib module, which is a more modern way to do some of these tasks, and we're going to see how to do the equivalent using that module. So let's start at the top by importing from pathlib. We're going to import the path object. Now pathlib gives you an object-oriented approach to working with paths, and this is the central object in that particular module. It's the path object. So we're going to work with that, and let's clear out this code here. We'll keep the file name around. Now we can call the path object like this to get a reference to the current working directory. So if I print that out, it prints out actually just a single dot, which in Unix terminology that means the current working directory. So if we print that out, we get a dot here. So that dot represents the current working directory. If you want to know the full absolute path to that directory, you can call the path.resolve function, and that will then print it out as a complete path such as this. And as well as calling the path object with no arguments, you can also pass an argument in here that points to the location of the path that you're looking at. In this case, I'm going to use the current working directory / the file name, which is contract.docx. And what that will do here is it will point to the file contract.docx within the directory. So if we save that and execute it, it will now point to our contract file. So let's store that within a variable called f, and we'll get rid of the brackets here. So f is now a pathlib object. If we print the type of f here and execute this, we get back a Windows path. So this is a pathlib object, and one of the functions that exists on that is the exists function. And this is similar to os.path.exists. You can use that to check whether or not a given path actually exists on your file system. So if we save that and execute it, this returns true because that is a valid path to an object on our file system. And like before, if we change the name and execute this again, it will evaluate to false. And just like the os.path module, as well as an exists function, we also have an isFile function. However, note that there is an underscore here, there wasn't before. We can then check whether or not the path points to a file or not, and in this case it's true. And there's also an isdir function as well, isdir, and that will tell you whether or not it's a directory. And in this case it's not, so it evaluates to false. So we can see there's equivalent ways of doing these operations on the path objects that we had in the os.path module. And what we're now going to do is we're going to build up paths using the pathlib module. There's a very nice syntax for doing this that was introduced by the pathlib module. So let's clear this out here, and we'll get rid of this file here as well. And we're going to build a path to the images directory here. So firstly, let's call the path object, and that will give us a reference to the current working directory. And to that we use an operator that looks like the division operator, just the / here, and after that we can point to the images directory. So this is normally what is used to do division in Python. In this case, because it follows a pathlib object, this is actually used to build up paths to objects on the file system. So we could then chain another one of these and say image.jpg, anything you want, and these can be as long as you need, but this is a new syntax for working with paths using the pathlib module. So that's our path to the images directory, and we can now print out the images directory.exist function, and once again we hope that that will evaluate to true, and it does. And of course that is a directory, so this will also evaluate to true. And I think one of the key takeaways from this video is that this particular syntax for building up paths is very nice, and it feels more intuitive than the os.path.join function. This in any event is just my preference, but I think this is a very nice syntax for working with paths in Python. So to close off this video, we're going to show how to get the extension from a particular file. So we're going to work with this file name to finish off here, and we can use the pathlib module. It has another attribute called suffix, which you can use to get the extension of a file. So let's set up a path to that file name. It's in the current directory, so we can just use this here. And then we will call .suffix on that, and let's print that to our terminal. And this should hopefully print out docx, which is the extension of that file, and that's what we get here at the bottom, .docx. How do we do that with the OS module? So rather than using pathlib, what we can do is we can use a function called os.path.splitExtension, splitExt, and we pass the file name to that, and if we print out what that returns, we should see that it returns a sequence containing two elements, the name of the file and then the extension of the file here. So if we wanted to just get the extension here, we would get the final element of that sequence, which you can use indexing notation in Python and -1. If you provide that, it will give you the last element within a list. If you provide that, it will give you the final element in a tuple or a list. And in this case, that will print out what we want, which is .docx. So that's all for this video. It's been a quick dive into the OS module and the pathlib module for certain path operations in Python. To summarize, there are some benefits I think to using pathlib. It's an object-oriented API that's centered around a path object, and it gives you a nice Pythonic syntax for building paths and checking whether or not things exist on the file system. And also, in addition to that, it's more specific. The OS module contains a lot of functionality. The pathlib module is more concise, and it's designed specifically for operating with paths. So that can be a benefit as well, and I would recommend using that where possible. So thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.